Over the past few years, something big has been happening in the world of nonprofits. More and more of them are starting businesses. If you're like, wait, what? How can they do that? Don't worry, I'm going to explain. According to the independent sector, nonprofit funding hasn't exactly been keeping pace with growing community needs. As needs become bigger and bigger, the money to address those needs is stagnating, or worse, it's going away completely. That means that more and more organizations are stretched thin and turning to new methods for fundraising, like nonprofit hybrid models, where organizations tap into both nonprofit and business strategies to generate revenue. I saw how this worked up close when I was running my own nonprofit. When grants and donations were running low, we decided to start a venture that ended up bringing in reliable revenue each year, and it actually helped us grow our budget significantly. But hybrid models aren't always the answer, and they aren't always easy to do correctly. So by the end of this video, you're going to have a clear understanding of what hybrid models actually are, how they're structured, and how to think about whether this approach could be a good fit for your organization. All right, so what do we actually mean by a nonprofit hybrid model? Simply put, it's when a nonprofit combines charitable activity with business activities, such as selling a product or service or running a business connected to the mission. You'll hear this often referred to as a social enterprise, which just means using business tactics to advance a social good goal. One well-known example you might have heard of is Homeboy Industries over in Los Angeles. Now, Homeboy Industries supports formerly gang-involved and formerly incarcerated individuals through job training and therapy and education and paid employment. But part of how they fund that work is through real operating businesses: a cafe and bakery, catering, embroidery services, a grocery store and farmer's market, and even dog grooming. So people buy a service or product from their enterprises, then the revenue goes back into the organization to fund the rest of its mission. And the business enterprises themselves are part of the program because they create paid jobs and training opportunities for their clients. That's actually a really important detail that I do want to emphasize here. In strong hybrid models, the business part isn't just about the money. The business's activities themselves further the mission of the nonprofit rather than pulling resources or attention away from it. Now, I'm going to share more about how nonprofit hybrid models are legally structured in just a minute, but I want to talk briefly about why we're seeing these models become more common today. Now, I have talked about this in past videos, but the funding landscape for nonprofits is evolving big time, and it's evolving quickly too. Charitable giving is getting more and more unpredictable in this challenging economy. Even if some donors are giving larger amounts, fewer and fewer donors are giving at all. That means that nonprofits are stuck competing with each other to get the attention of the fewer donors. Not only that, but when a large amount of government funding and contracts was slashed for organizations, that meant private foundations were looked to in order to compensate, also increasing competition for grants. Now, according to Bridgespan, earned income through business activities is becoming a larger part of the funding mix for many nonprofits. And I've seen reports indicating that in recent years, about half of all nonprofit revenue is from earned income, not grants or donations. But it's important to know that earned income is not a be-all, end-all solution. Bridgespan's research points out that organizations using earned income aren't usually trying to replace fundraising completely. They're just trying to smooth out some volatility. So even groups like Homeboy Industries still raise money from donations and grants whenever possible. Earned revenue can act as a sort of stabilizer when donations fluctuate or grants don't renew on time. The goal here is to create sustainability so that your organization isn't constantly operating on the brink. So now let's talk about how these models are usually set up, because the structure here can really matter. There are several ways to structure a nonprofit hybrid model, but I'm going to hone in on the most common two types. The first is a single 501c3 with earned revenue, or a mission integrated model. In this setup, the business activities happen as part of the nonprofit's other activities. Everything is happening under one single organization. According to guidance from the IRS, nonprofits are allowed to earn revenue by selling goods or services as long as the business activity directly furthers their charitable mission and impacts. For example, a workforce nonprofit running a cafe as a job training program for their clients, or an arts organization charging for classes that teach people how to paint, thus achieving their mission of making the arts more accessible through the sale of the service itself, these are all aligned. Another way to think about this is simply that the nonprofit is charging a fee for its programs. But the IRS can be picky here. Under the model, if income comes from activities that aren't related to the mission, then revenue generated could be subject to what's called unrelated business income taxes. That's one reason organizations need to be careful about how they design these activities. Now, the second common structure is a 501c3 with a wholly owned for-profit subsidiary. Now, in this case, a separate business entity is formed, and then that separate business is owned by the nonprofit as a parent entity. That business can then generate profit, and then those profits are transferred back to the nonprofit to support the mission. This approach is often used when the business activity is not directly tied to the charitable purpose, or when the organization just wants some clearer legal separation between the nonprofit and the business. But there are a lot of accounting and legal nuances here, especially around hiring and paying employees for the business side of the entities and potential conflicts of interest. And I am not an accountant or a lawyer, so please be sure to seek professional advice if you are thinking of going down this route. The point here is that both structures involve some measure of complexity that you'll need to educate yourself on and be comfortable with before taking on this type of model. Now, in a minute here, I'm going to talk about the pros and cons of using a nonprofit hybrid model so that you can think about if this model could be a good fit for your situation. But first, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor. Click and Pledge makes it easy for new and growing nonprofits to start strong and scale with confidence. With Click and Pledge, you're going to get professional grade tools for super affordable startup level costs from day one. They've got customizable donation forms you can plug right into your website. These forms are often the foundation of any good online fundraising strategy. But Click and Pledge also has a number of other tools included in their affordable flat monthly costs that you can use as your nonprofit grows, like in-person and peer-to-peer fundraising features, video fundraising with embedded donation links, text-to-give tools, donor management and custom reports, Salesforce and other integrations, and these are all included with no contracts or surprise add-on fees. Now, unlike some platforms that increase your fees as you grow, Click and Pledge pricing stays the same whether you have 10 donors or 10,000. Use the QR code and link in the description below to check out Click and Pledge, book a demo, and get your first $25 monthly fee waived. All right, this part's important, so let's talk really quick about the trade-offs with some of these models. You've probably gleaned some of these already, but let's go through them briefly one by one. Now, on the plus side, hybrid models can bring in more consistent revenue. Additionally, because earned income is usually unrestricted, your organization can use it for anything it needs: staffing, systems, technology, infrastructure, etc. The things that are typically hardest to fund through grants. For some organizations, that flexibility can feel like finally being able to breathe a little bit. But there are downsides also. For one, hybrid models take time to design and even longer to stabilize. They can feel like running two different organizations at once, and technically you are in many ways. They can also require some upfront investment. I mean, think about it. You're basically starting a business activity, and depending on what it is, you might need equipment, special training, or other systems, just like starting a business under any other circumstance. And finally, as we said earlier, there can also be restrictions around what activities nonprofits can engage in, how profits move between entities, and how much unrelated income is allowed before it creates compliance issues. So again, reiterating, talk to an accountant or a lawyer before getting too far in. But with the right setup, hybrid models can be really effective. They just tend to reward careful planning and strong operations and tend to punish shortcuts. So, before you decide whether a hybrid approach makes sense for you, there are a few questions I want you to sit with. First, is there a natural connection between your mission and something people are already willing to pay for? If the connection feels forced, that's usually a signal to slow down and think about this for a minute. Second, do you have or can you realistically build the operational capacity to handle this added complexity? This could entail new systems, staffing, training and specialized skills, and other setup. And third, are you prioritizing sustainability or speed? Hybrid models usually favor durability over quick wins, as I said before. If you answered no to any of these questions, it doesn't necessarily mean that a hybrid model isn't the right fit for you. It just means that you may need to do some additional strategizing before you could take it on successfully. But I do just want to say this one thing about nonprofit fundraising in general. What ultimately determines fundraising success isn't whether you use traditional fundraising models or a hybrid model. It's really about whether your funding approach matches your unique mission, your capacity, and the reality of how your organization functions day to day. Hybrid models work best when they're chosen intentionally, not out of panic, and not because they sound innovative, but because they fit what you're trying to achieve. The goal here is to choose the methods that will help you build something resilient enough to allow you and your organization to keep showing up for your community. So here's what I recommend if you want to think about this further. Spend some time mapping your programs, your strengths and your assets and your limits, and notice if and where a hybrid model might genuinely support the work or just complicate it. And if you want additional support, I share practical tips and resources every week in my free newsletter for nonprofit leaders and change makers, and I'll link that below. In the next video, we're going to talk about the biggest avoidable problem that I see happening on nonprofit boards and how to avoid it. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss that one, and I'll see you next week. I'm Amber Melanie Smith.